Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. After doing the aircraft controls video, it is now time to do an updated ground controls video. And to be quite honest with you, ground controls hasn't changed as much as the good old controls for aircraft. A lot of stuff has been added to aircraft, so this one is more of a look at some slightly different things that have been added, mainly down to the radar stuff and all of those different things. So going into the controls first, we do have the movement ones, which are pretty interesting. There's a few things that I don't use here that could be more useful for some players, but for me it's not a huge thing, and we'll go through why. So first of all, automatic transmission is on. This is basically meaning that you don't have to shift gears every time that you want to move, but also I do have transmission mode on as well. So what this means is I can quick switch between an automatic transmission and also a transmission where I control the gears. There's a few reasons for this, and I'll kind of show you why in the thing. Also, ground vehicle throttling and steering, it's just standard WASD, nothing too crazy, but just to give you an idea for why use something like the steering one, or why use the manual transmission one. So when you are on an automatic transmission, you obviously can just use W to go forward. I do have cruise control set to E and Q. There's usually 3 cruise controls, so there's the first one, which depending on the vehicle will just push you up to a certain point, and then if you go to cruise control 2, as you can see in the bottom left, CC2, it will push you forward a little bit faster, and then you have CC Max, which will try and push yourself to as far as you can. Now, one of the things that I like doing is if I'm going to an area and I'm unsure if there is someone holding on a corner, I'll usually go into something like CC1 to be able to kind of balance the gun and still push forward. You can see even with something like an M26 Pershing, which doesn't have access to a stabilizer, you can still have a pretty stabilized gun platform on CC1. And then on CC2, it gets a little bit more rambunctious, as you can see, so it's going to be a little bit harder to hit the target as you go along, especially if you go over bumpy terrain, even on this road. But one thing that you can do to manage this better is if I hit L, and now it's in a manual transmission, first of all, you know, if I just if I don't hit anything, then it's set in neutral. If I hit Q, then it goes into the reverse gears, so I can use all the different reverse gears if I want. But if I go into forward gear, what I can do is I can manage the speed a little bit better. So let's say in CC1 it is a bit too quick and the gun isn't stable, then I can stick it instead in gear 1. Then if I'm in gear 2, it can also be more stable than CC1. Gear 3, same thing. Gear 4 is about the same as CC1, and then maybe I want gear 5, which is a little bit quicker. Maybe I can still deal with the stability issues, but probably not, so back to gear 4. So it's just about being able to stay on the move, but also keeping the gun stable as you push forward. And I think generally that's pretty important as you go forward in stuff. So it's a little thing that probably not a lot of people use. Most people just use automatic transmission, but in those areas where you are pushing forward and your cruise controls don't work very well, it's actually a nice little thing to be able to do. Short brake means that you can, bring your vehicle to a stop very quickly. I don't use this because I generally I don't go at like crazy fast speeds all the time, and also if I want to brake hard, what I'll do is I'll shift my tracks and just kind of brake with those. Same with the vehicle left brake and right brake. I don't need them because I just manage everything through these. Obviously, if people want to be a little bit more technical, they could definitely use these ones. The driver assistance mode, so this one's quite a useful one for consoles, but not really for PC. What this basically means is if you turn this on, the place where you turn the turret to, the vehicle will just will drive to. So instead of following your WASD controls, it will follow where your turret is looking. Now, for a person like me who uses C a lot to look around and then puts the turret in a different direction, that's not going to be useful because that's going to kind of screw over how I generally play. So that's why I turn this off. Hull aiming mode is on left control. This is only for really the STRV 103s and also the VT12. So it's on a button which is not really close to anything, but close enough to be able to use with WASD when we're using those vehicles. And then of course turn on and off engine as I, just because that's the standard one, you don't really have to change anything. This is where it gets a little bit crazy. So of course all of the different buttons here when it comes to the weaponry. So you've got fire main caliber weapon, which is the fire the main cannon, LMB of course. Secondary is MMB, and then machine guns is space, and then from special guns is left control 4 or MB5. Now this means like rockets and stuff like that I can use on MB5, and that's where I use it from. This is because I usually use MB4 to push the torque, and also I don't really like having anything on the buttons on my mouse when it comes to tanks. I don't know why. It's just kind of nice having my thumb and my pinky rest kind of on the mouse mat, while my two fingers, my index and my middle finger, are on left and right click, and then the middle click is, or the middle scroll wheel is used by the middle finger. It's just what I find comfortable. And if I don't have to use the special buttons on my mouse, I won't do. So pretty simple though. You know, the only thing that can kind of screw people up is using MMB for the secondary, but generally you don't fire the secondary and the main caliber at the same time. And I use right click for zoom. So I use right click to zoom in to be able to, you know, hit targets and be able to see stuff. So I zoom in with the right, and then I hit them with the secondary, or I hit them with the primary. If you want to see this in action, a vehicle which kind of has all of these, I suppose, is the BMP-2M. So this one has, you know, the main caliber gun, it has the ATGM, and then it also has access to a tertiary gun. Usually the tertiary gun isn't that useful. So this is LMB, second one is this one, and then the right click is the missile. So, you know, as you can see, I do also have missile set to left control, if, you know, people want to use that instead. It's basically just a double control, just how I'm feeling on that day. But yeah, so that's how it works. The same way it works for like the BMD and the BMP-3 that have the two guns, and then also stuff like the M60 AMBT. It's something which is really easy for me to be able to pick between. There was a bit of an issue because certain vehicles had the wrong setup when it came to their special guns and their secondary guns, so the wrong way around, but nowadays it's a lot better. Then we have select stuff. So pretty much what these buttons are, so num 3, 4, 5 and 6, is if you want to specifically move certain areas of your vehicle but not others. So if you want to select just your gun and not your machine guns, you can hit num 4. If you want to select your secondary weapon, which is generally a machine gun or something like that, you can hit 5, and then 6 is machine gun, and reset is num 3. Now generally you don't need this. It's not too useful. The only time you really want to use something like this is, let's say, if you're getting peppered by a plane and you don't want to move your turret front just in case something pushes forward. You can then move your 50 cal up, and it will change to, basically, while you're controlling this, by the way, one thing that is true is that it will, one thing that is true is it will change your firing with it to your main primary button. So that's something to always think about. When it comes to also this, you can actually make some pretty cool cinematic stuff. So if you prefer guns up like this and pointing in the air, kind of like how you'd see it in real life, or something like that, then you can do that. So you can see right now I'm controlling the main caliber gun, and I'm not controlling the 50 cal on the top, but as I said, this has pretty limited use. It's not something that you have to really worry about, and just to reset it, you just make sure to have a reset button, and you can fire everything at once. But yeah, it's a cool little thing. It's not a huge thing. You know, it's not something that most people would use, but it's good for screenshots. So there's at least that, you know. Then you've also got toggle auto turret targets. So Obviously, if you have an auto turret, this can be useful. I don't really use these ones. I just kind of target myself. So I move, I move my mouse to the position and then use the auto target. Maybe in the future this will become more useful for certain devices, but right now it's not too useful. There's also switch IRCM mode on and off. So IRCM is infrared countermeasures. The reason why you might want to turn this off with certain vehicles is just because they create a lot of light in the dark. So if you're in something like a T90, for example, which has an IRCM, or if you're in something like a, what's the word? The Puma, right? So obviously this thing has NVDs, and you can see here it is quite bright. But if you turn them off, it isn't so bright. So it's really easy to see a T90 coming because it looks like this on the battlefield. The same with the Puma when it has basically a light on top of its head. The other thing that you can also control with certain vehicles is turning off its IR spotlight. You can see here on the Abrams, this is the M1A1HC, I believe. It also has an IRCM, so you can see how it glows when you have the NVDs up. So across the battlefield, it's just super easy to see these things. So it's one of those where you want to be careful, because if somebody's just pottering along in a night battle with NVDs on, first of all, if we just turn them off, maybe that person doesn't see us, maybe they haven't looked through their thermals, but you can see how obvious of a target that thing is over there because of its IRCM. So that's always something to think about, never forget about, and it can kind of keep you alive as you go along. So yeah, it's important to turn off your IRCM in night battles, especially if you're with certain vehicles, mainly the Soviet ones in general. Sometimes I like keeping them on, or I like keeping my IR spotlights on and turning them on and running at the enemy, because it means that they focus on me, and therefore my teammates can kind of do what they want to do and be able to flank and stuff like that. So if I'm in a position where I kind of want to annoy the enemy, that's generally what I'll do. But yeah, that's not something that happens a lot. Then also smoke grenades, obviously, just firing them off, and smoke screening. Once again, simple buttons. G is very close to WAS, so it's very easy to hit. One thing to know about smoke grenades is if you are hitting the fire button, which I have set to 6, so to put the fire out, what you can do is you can hit the 6 and then G afterwards, and it will fire off kind of a half salvo. This means that if you're in a pinch, you can actually get like maybe 3 smoke sets off instead of 2, which can be very useful. Smoke screening is obviously for ESS. I just sit it right next to grenades. I don't use it that much apart from at lower tiers, so that's pretty much it. Rate of fire or change rate of fire is on B. This isn't that useful for many vehicles, so it's set to a button that I hardly use. The only time I really use B is for binos, so it shares the commonality with that. It might be worth moving this to like a different button just in case your change rate of fire gets kind of screwed by using the rangefinder. Then also next shell type, this is covered in a bunch of this is covered when it comes to the other stuff. I have 1, 2, 3 set to different shells, so I don't need a next shell type. Because I can just hit one of those buttons and it'll load it anyway. The weapon lock MB5, so this is for IR guided missiles from the ground, so stuff like the Type 93 and things like that. So I have exactly the same buttons used for my weapon locks for air as I do for ground when it comes to IR missiles. This is so I don't get confused, and this is so it's not all over the place. So the other thing is some of these controls are a bit bulked up when it comes to radar. The main one that matters is this one and also this one. You can set these two to the same button because they do the same thing. So they just do them in different modes. So you have select radar RST target to lock on and lock radar RST target on. So pretty much they're the same thing. They work the same way. So setting these two to the same means that you can, lock onto a target simply. All of these buttons I don't actually use. I would set them usually to 1, 2, and 3, just so the weapon selection stuff, as long as it's on the exit weapon selection stuff, it's fine. But generally, this stuff is done in the multifunction menu, so it's not a huge deal. So yeah, all you've got to do is make sure to set those lock-on ones, and then you'll be completely fine. If you don't have those set, then it can be a bit of an issue, because obviously you won't be able to lock quickly. But you can see here, you know, it's very quick to be able to lock. And also at the same time, some vehicles you do have to go into the scope and lock, but that's fine as well. Once again, it's just simply MMB to lock and then LMB to fire. So it's really, really simple the way that I have it set up. You know, obviously with the Sergeant York, it's quite easy to show you how effective it is, but in other vehicles, it's just as effective. And you want a quick movement between your lock-on and your fire. So having LMB and MB at the same time is definitely the way to go with that. Okay, so simple as. The other radar mechanics can, as I said, can be actually managed from the multifunction menu, and since usually you don't want to change them that often, I think it's fine to do it from there. That's exactly the same with these as well. Night vision mode is left shift. This also mirrors to thermals. So my thermals is right next to my WASD. This is just so it's easier to switch between them, as we talked about before. Sometimes sometimes you want thermals on, sometimes you don't want thermals on, especially if there's a lot of carcasses around. So having the button where you can quick switch near your WASD, which is where your general hand is going to be, is fantastic. So it also doesn't match up with my aviation stuff. Stuff like that is countermeasures, but once again, a very important thing for jets at the same time. The IR spotlight is on left. So once again, just like I did with aviation, a lot of the kind of middling mechanics or things that aren't really used that often are put onto the arrow keys because it's quite far away from the WASD. Now, an IR spotlight, if you didn't know what that is, there are certain vehicles that have IR spotlights in the game, mainly Soviet, but I think there's a few others. The T-72, for example, is it this vehicle? I can't remember if it has an IR spotlight. I think the T-64 does. But basically, it is a spotlight that is on the vehicle, and what you can do is it just produces a beam in front of you. So technically, you're supposed to be able to see better. So you can see here, we're in NVD mode, and then if you hit left, there's the beam. So it comes out of that area there. Now, once again, all this really does is, as you can see for that one, is it just makes you more of a prime target. But if somebody only has NVDs and they don't have access to, you know, just their eyes, then it can actually be quite hard to see a target if they're looking through NVDs. But also at the same time, it means that if I'm perusing around the place, it is super easy to work out where the target is and then set up for it and then fire. So usually you don't want to use these, but they are quite cool and also good for some nice effects, and do give you slightly increased, you know, viewing, but nothing to really write home about. The best thing to use stuff like that for is legitimately annoying your opponent. Like, I'm not even kidding. It's best to just annoy your opponent with them and use yourself as a target while your team can kind of clean up. That really is the only use for them. Then you've got changing the color scheme of the thermal sight. So if you actually wanna change it while you're there. Generally, it's not too useful to do. I know a few people prefer certain colors compared to others, but for me, I'm not a huge fan. Another thing that I do have set up around that area, though, so you can see here, you've got the kind of different colors that you can see. So you've got the negative of the standard. You can also, I believe, change your colors if you want to over here. So thermal sight, you can do it green or you can do it red if you want. So if that like tickles your fancy, and then you can do the opposite of those. But these just hurt my eyes, so I don't know. I've got pretty sensitive eyes at the end of the day, so having anything which is too aggressive can kind of hurt them. So yeah, that's something that you can do if you feel like it. Obviously, ground battle settings is something to look at as well, to kind of help you out when it comes to UI and also what else you want to see. We'll have a look at it at the end of this video. But yeah, so you can invert your thermals if you want to, if you find that easier. I personally don't. The other few buttons that I have set up for other stuff, command to fire control, is the delete button, the numdel button. So basically, I have colon set up for commander sight, as you can see here, or the colon with the comma. And then to actually use it to fire, I use del. Now, I hardly ever use commander sight. I don't have it attached to my standard binos either. But if you're a person who wants to use that, you might want to once again put those keys a bit closer together. But I just have never found a use for it. There's a few vehicles that can kind of use it, stuff like the Bradley. It's not too bad in, but the vast majority of them, it's still, at least for me, better to do binos and gunner sight, mainly because that's what I'm used to. The camera control stuff, so zoom camera is R and B, right mouse button. Sniper mode, which is gunner mode, is V. Once again, close to WASD, easy to hit. Driver camera is X, because sometimes when I'm driving around at the start of a battle, I like to just hit it so I can kind of wander around in it. I know this is not something that a lot of people do, but for me, I like having it. Most people probably, it's fine to unbind that because it's only going to get in your way, or put it further away in a different part of the keyboard. The binos is Z, once again, close to WASD, so you can easily quick switch between looking and shooting things with you know, your standard keys. I don't have stabilizer mode bound because there is absolutely no reason in this game to turn off your stabilizer. It might give you like 1% more movement at most, but you're going to lose so much more not having the stabilizer. So don't even bother binding that, because otherwise what's going to happen is you're going to hit it randomly and it's going to lose you a fight. So don't bother with that. Target tracking in ground vehicle, you can also have this on if you want to. For me personally, I'm not a huge fan of it because of the fact that I can generally aim pretty well and I rely on my general aiming, but if you're a person who prefers that stuff, then you can do that. Then also you have the view in battle, invert, y-axis and tank aiming stuff, so you can move around with all of these, but you don't need to because you can just use the mouse. So since I use mouse and keyboard, just use the mouse. None of this is required. Obviously you have the aim acceleration delay, mouse wheel multiplier as you move around, gamepad aim acceleration, which is for consoles, so you know if you're using that. But the mouse wheel one is the interesting one. So some people use this as a zoom axis, so you can zoom in and zoom out with it. I use it for sight distance control. So what this means is I can quickly switch between I can quickly switch if I need to, usually at mid-tiers because they gave everything a laser rangefinder at high tier and also made it automatic, so you don't have to worry about it anymore. But what I would do back in the day is I would get a target like this, and then I would shift it up to near the distance on the left, and then I would fire. Right, so it meant that I could, use the laser rangefinder or use the rangefinder, and then find it, and then bang. But nowadays it's automatic, so it doesn't matter too much. But even with standard rangefinders, like if you have something like a Pershing or a mid-tier thing, and it doesn't have a rangefinder, then it's more based on your crew skills, how far you can range find, and also how accurate it is. But you can still use it, right? So if you want to shoot this Panzer IV, for example, it can measure range, and then it tells you, okay, 350, right, let's sight distance control to 400, undershoot a little bit, and then fire, and then it dies, right? So you can do stuff like that with the sight distance control with the mouse wheel. I would highly recommend having sight distance control on the mouse wheel. You can also set it to reset itself. I don't personally, because usually if I'm using it, I'm doing minor adjustments, and I don't mind moving my thing up and down. So that's something to do when it comes to the game. Definitely worth doing to be able to make minor adjustments while firing at targets which are further away. So that'll help you at pretty much every tier, not just not just mid tiers, but low tiers and high tiers too. So that's very important. Stuff like suspension. So this stuff is for hydropneumatic suspension on vehicles like the Type 74, the Type 90, the Type 10, and also a few others. So I use the top buttons on my numpad to be able to go backwards, forwards, right, and then left is num 1. I know it's a little bit odd, but then num plus is center, so that gets me back to the normal. The reason why these are set up like this is because 4, 5, and 6 actually are the weapon controls. You could probably clean this up a little bit and put all of this stuff at 1 to 6 and then 7 to 9 for the weapon stuff, but I'm used to that by now, right? So I've been running this for a long time, and also at the same time suspension controls are not on a lot of vehicles, so you don't have to worry about it too much. Ground vehicle repairs on F, as you know, usual. I think this is the standard one. Basically, F is repair, since it's right next to WASD. G is smokes, H is ESS, J is leave the battle. So it's all pretty decent at the end of the day. Then you've got first, second, third, and fourth type of shell. So this is just generally how you pick which shells to use. Artillery is 5, fire extinguisher is 6. Crew replenishment is the equal sign, and active scouting is tilde, and the rangefinder is B. So, and you also have these for arcade, which are 7, 8, and 9. So I think it's pretty important to have the rangefinder bound to something which is close to WASD. It's very important to have active scouting bound with something near WASD, so I use the tilde key. I use tab to be able to see the scoreboard. You could maybe put this on caps lock if you wanted. If that worked out well for you, you could even maybe put it on a mouse button if you wanted to. But for me, tilde works pretty nicely. And also, at the same time, the rangefinder is more and more key as you go up the tiers. If you have a laser rangefinder, it is an essential. If you have anything else, like a standard rangefinder in the mid tier, it can also be very, very useful. Crew replenishment, you're generally not going to be in the fight while using it, so putting it on the equal sign means that, you know, we generally have to stop to use it, so just hit it and then there you go. Easy as pie. Towing cable is exactly the same. If you're in a firefight, you're not usually going to use the towing cable, so it's okay to push it away from your standard buttons. So that's why I have it sat there. At the same time, crosshair lighting, I should say. I have this on delete because sometimes I use this, but it's usually I flick it on and off at the start of a battle, depending on what the surroundings is. So if there's a lot of, if it's a night battle and I don't have NVDs, for example, or if I do have NVDs, sometimes I find it easier to change the crosshair and actually see. So I'll give you an idea with the XM1 here. And once again, since this is just a click on, click off thing, I'll do it at the start of a battle and then forget about it, which is why it's linked to a button over here. But you can see the crosshair lighting changes it to red if you want that. So it's just easier to see when it's in the dark. So if you don't have thermals, or if you only have NVDs or something, it can be super useful, but it's not something that's, you know, massively required. So it's one of those things that is away from everything, just because it's a click on, click off setup. Then from there, we have the reload custom sight thing, which I don't use. So that kind of sits there. And then entrenching, which once again, you have to be out of the firefight to use. So that's on the right hand side of the keyboard, away from moving. And then sight distance control is not assigned because I use the mouse wheel. So there's no reason for it to be assigned, because the mouse wheel just does it as you're there and as you're going. So you can see with the general controls of ground, it's a lot easier than aviation. There's a lot less stuff to think about and there's a lot less stuff to do when it comes to it, but there is still a decent amount of things. The ground vehicle battle stuff as well. Grass and tank sight off. I understand people like immersion. I like seeing things. My eyes aren't very good. Hit camera obviously on. Ground vehicle destruction on. You know, you can turn those off if you want to save a bit of time, but there's no reason to. And also, I have the commander camera not in my loop, so not in my gunner albino loop. I'd rather have that, you know, the side or whatever. Store tactical map zoom by scenery, which is quite nice, and then show compass in third person view. This is my general stuff. It works very well for me. I could maybe increase the tactical map a little bit and it would be a bit more useful, especially since you should be looking at your map pretty much all the time to see where people are and to see where people are going. But this is what works for me when it comes to the game. We'll probably go over these options in a different video, but that is all of my settings for ground. Pretty simple, not as complicated as aviation, but definitely still up there as always. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd just like to thank Nicholas Richardson, eLoveGoat, Pyman675, Winter Scientist, Merciless Reaper, Jerry Prevolt, Megadino King, Orange Tail, Teddy, John Ryman, Universe, Ambrosius McClellan, Daniel Stanton, Moxie, B. Young, Uncle Bean, Sem Arslan, Derek R., Bareen, Lafouche, and Samuel Slick for supporting the channel.